I grew up in a very small town called Chesney that's located in South Carolina. At the time, if I remember correctly, the population was less than 1,000. It's the type of town where most people know each other. At the time, I was about 20 and visiting my parents for a few weeks during summer. I remember sitting at the kitchen table during the day talking to my mom and her getting a frantic call from my dad telling her that police were everywhere near his work that day, Greer, South Carolina, and that someone had been murdered. After hanging up the phone, she goes and checks the locks and turns on the news. An older man was shot in his home about 20 minutes from our house. Living in a small town where the main criminal offense was theft or drugs, and everyone knows each other, this was shocking for everyone. After my dad came home, we sat there and discussed what had happened. My mom, me, my younger brother, and my dad. My dad said he had hoped it was just some freak occurrence and the person would be captured. That night, my cousin Larry came by, and he had a habit of hanging out with less than reputable people. But overall, he was very harmless, especially to his family. He asked if he could spend the night at my parents' house since he was going to be working with my dad the next day, and my mom said of course. He later asked if he could bring a friend, Big Country. My mom was a little hesitant because she really didn't know the person, but my cousin told her that they had been friends for years and they had lost touch for a while. Today, Big Country called out of nowhere and asked to stay with him because he was going through hard times and was trying to get back on his feet. My mom, being as sweet and naive as she is, said yes, and my dad even agreed to let Big Country work with them the following day. Later that night, Larry and Big Country arrive at our house, and right away we noticed that Big Country turns on the television and is almost glued to the news. After a few minutes, we are all sitting in the living room and my dad asks Big Country what his name was. He replies with, "Why do you want to know that?" And my dad just looked at him and said he was trying to be nice and sociable. Big Country then replies that his name is Patrick, and my dad continues to try to make conversation. My dad noticed that Big Country is still intrigued with the news, so he says, "That's horrible what happened, isn't it?" And I remember this conversation as clear as day because of how uncomfortable I felt. Big Country looks at my dad and says that everyone has reasons for doing what they do. My dad then kind of ended the conversation, and he and my mom went to their bedroom where they called me, my brother, and my cousin Larry into the bedroom. They asked how well Larry knew this guy, and Larry answered with, "We used to hang out for years, but lost touch." My dad said, "Well, he seems kind of weird to me." And Larry told him that he is a little strange, but is harmless. My dad tells him to make sure that he was out by 7 a.m. and to make sure that they both stayed in the spare room because he didn't want Big Country wandering around his house, and he was responsible for him. Larry agreed, and my parents went to bed. My brother and I then went back into the living room and sat down. As awkward as it was, my brother asked Big Country if he had a bag or anything he needed to get out of his car before he turned the alarm system on. I remember Big Country turning and looking at my brother and saying anything that he needed was already in the house. That was my cue to leave and go to my room, where I locked the door. The next morning at breakfast, my mom casually asked everyone how they slept, except for Big Country who was still sleeping, and everyone except for Larry said that they slept fine. Apparently Larry slept like shit because Big Country kept pacing the floor and couldn't sleep. While we all thought that was weird, we were all just happy to get him out of the house. About an hour later, my dad, cousin Larry, and Big Country left the house. My mom then said that she had the worst feeling all night and that she was glad they were gone. Skip ahead about 4 days. The murder case in Greer was left unsolved, and no suspects were discovered yet. Everyone kind of let their guard down by then. I remember being outside doing work for my parents when the house phone started ringing. I went inside to answer the phone. It was a family member telling me that 2 more people had been found bound and killed, an older lady in her 80s and her daughter. I don't remember the exact location, but somewhere not far from my family's house. I remember thinking that it was so weird because things like that didn't happen here. Later that day, a news report or sheriff's news conference said that they thought it was connected to the Greer murder and that we possibly had a serial killer on our hands. They stated everyone should keep their doors locked and be observant. That sent panic through the entire community. A few family members asked my dad to borrow a gun. These are people who had sworn to never own a gun. Not long after that, my dad asked my grandmother to come stay with us until the crime was solved. He also asked me and my brother to stay with my mom and grandma during the day. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise I heard, I got up to check on. Noises that I normally wouldn't pay attention to. Even though the alarm was set, I was still expecting the worst case each time I got up. The next day, as I was watching television, the local news anchor broke a story that 2 more people had been shot about 10 minutes or so from our house, and that they thought it was linked. The news anchor encouraged everyone to stay indoors because this person didn't seem to mind killing multiple people, no matter what time of day. This shooting happened at a furniture store. One man and his daughter who had come in to check on him were shot. Sadly, she died on July 4th from her injuries. Once again, everyone was in panic mode because this was now 5 people who had been killed in just a few days. Skip ahead to July 6th. We were still in fear that the serial killer would strike again. We were all sitting in the living room watching the news again, and we all assumed the worst, that someone else had been murdered. The news anchor said that the police believed they had shot and killed the guy who was responsible for the 5 killings. We all breathed a sigh of relief. Then the news anchor said that his name was Patrick Burris and showed a mugshot. It was the same guy who had spent the night with us. It was Big Country. The news anchor said that Patrick had a long list of previous charges and was with 2 other people. They had broken into an empty house and the neighbors called the police. When the police arrived, Patrick started shooting at them. They returned fire and killed him. They later said that they suspected he was going to kill the 2 other people he had been with that evening. A witness had said earlier in the week that he had saw a guy who may be a suspect, and while the police put out a sketch, almost everything about the sketch was different than Patrick Big Country Burris. That's why no one suspected him. I'll make sure to include the news articles as well as a Wikipedia article. I know that not all Wikipedia articles are actually true, but this article seems to be pretty spot on. Years ago, I used to live in a pretty populated city. I lived with my family, my mom, dad, sister, and my 2 dogs. We lived in a 2-story house in a suburb near the city. My dad worked downtown, so we were there frequently. I should also mention that around the time of this story, I was 8 or 9. This particular day, a Friday in the middle of summer, was just another normal day. My sister was sleeping over at her friend's house. My mom and I had stayed home all day to watch movies. That evening, we decided to go meet my dad downtown and get some ice cream, since he was about to get off work. Fast forward about 3 hours later, and it's about 9 p.m. or so, and it's dark out. Since my mom and I drove to meet my dad, and my dad had his own car, we were separated, but arrived home at the same time. I rode back with my dad. My mom pulls into the driveway first. I noticed when her headlights shined over our fence, the gate was wide open. We knew for certain that we'd shut it and locked it, having 2 huskies and all. My mom got out of her car and gasped. My dad stops the car and we both get out. My mom is crouched down checking the damage of the fence gate. Apparently, whoever broke in, we assumed, used some kind of tool to pry it open, since almost half the boards on it were bent or broken off. The next thing I noticed was that our dogs were both freaking the hell out. Then I realized the window by the door was broken. My heart dropped. By this point, I was legitimately scared. My dad pulled out his pocket knife and went inside. I also grabbed my bat, which was under the porch. My mom just stood by the front door begging my dad not to go in. He said to call the cops, which she did. My dad and I slowly went into the house. The first thing we noticed was the little TV in the kitchen was gone. "Fuck," my dad swore. Now I was more angry than scared. Whoever broke in must have ransacked the whole house. That probably meant the living room TV and my PlayStation. I took a knife from the drawer and put it in my pocket, just in case. I don't know why my dad didn't stop me since I was only 9, but I guess he didn't care based on the current situation. Still unnerved, my dad and I inched through the first floor of our house. We checked the living room. Of course, our main TV had been stolen. When we let the dogs out, still freaking out, in the front yard, we had an invisible fence so they wouldn't leave. The house was silent. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. But there were more than one pair. There were at least 2 of these goons in my house. It sounded like they were in my parents' bedroom. Obviously, they knew we were home. They probably ran to a nearby closet to hide. I gripped my bat tighter. "Whoever the fuck you are, I won't hesitate to blow your head off," my dad yelled up the stairs. I'd never seen my dad this angry before. My dad didn't actually own a gun. He obviously said that to make them scared. And it must have worked, because we heard the footsteps shift from the master bedroom, near the stairs, to the other side of the house, which must have meant they were either in my sister's room or my room. Right about then was when we heard the sirens approaching the house. I heard a very loud and distinct "shit" from the upstairs of the house. Once the police stopped in front of our house, my mom came running into the room. I quickly told her that there were at least 2 goons hiding in the upstairs and that some stuff was stolen. Then we heard banging on the front door. "Police!" I rushed to the door and let them in. "We have a call saying there was a break-in here," the officer said. "Yes," my mom said, crying. She said something along the lines of, "They broke in through the back while we weren't here. They're upstairs. They broke a window and..." "We understand. We'll go check it out," the other officer said. I suddenly felt safe. They went upstairs, and not even a minute later we heard them yelling for someone to get down. Soon after, the cops had 2 criminals handcuffed and were escorting them down the stairs. One of them looked to be in his mid-30s. He had a long, unkempt orange beard and a mustache. I remember he was wearing a baseball cap and jeans. The other guy was even younger, and dressed in all black, and was apparently wearing a ski mask, since the cop who was escorting him was carrying one. The cops told us they were hiding in the closet in my room, and that they were also both armed with pistols, which freaked me out. By then, many of the neighbors had gathered around the house trying to see what was going on. I distinctly remember the cops driving away with the man in the back. The bearded one in the baseball cap gave me a blank, creepy stare that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. When this happened, I was only 8 or 9, so I was traumatized for a while. After that incident, I always made sure that all the doors were locked at night, and had one of the huskies sleep at the end of my bed. We also installed a house alarm soon after. The thing that disturbs me the most is thinking what would have happened if we wouldn't have gone for ice cream. Would they have broken in anyway? Would they have killed us? Had they been planning it for a while? It still sends shivers down my spine to this day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend, and I really appreciate you watching. And sorry this one's a little bit shorter. Some of you might be able to notice in my voice, some of you might not, but I'm actually kind of getting sick. I've been fighting it for a couple of days. So I'm just happy I actually got this done. And if you are too, make sure you smash that like button. I'll catch you guys in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.